center of my practice. Instead of moving on from that approach, I've just sort of developed it and changed it. For me, it used to be about making large outdoor sculptures, and then it would be the documentation of those that would sort of serve as a sort of a center point, as evidence, or as a way to crystallize a larger kind of way to view this work. So this piece here, I suppose you'd call it a lens that a camera attaches here and always looks at this from a fixed position. So these drawings over here are all photographs taken exactly of the same thing, but based on its angle and where it is in the forest, you get completely different results that have the exact same compositions. For me, a lot of the time when I'm putting these frames together, the frame is almost as much a part of the work as the image itself. And for me, that's the sort of a way to give it more weight and to give the documentation, to let the documentation become its own object rather than just being a reference back to something else. The reasons why I use the different materials are often sort of initially aesthetic, and then they sort of become, not to make a pun, but sort of woven into the fabric of how I look at and approach the works. I mean, these works, I suppose, are what I call glass sandwiches, which is a layer of plywood, then the photograph, then the glass, and then that all gets kind of wrapped up with string and different other materials. And at the end, they sort of have a cohesive solidity that I really like. Every image or everything is always viewed in context, so I don't see any reason why I shouldn't have a large amount of control over how the image is perceived. And I guess if you were to look at my box of strings, there's a definite sort of color palette that runs through it. There's nothing too brash, or if there is, it's always used quite sparingly and might be painted over then with a wash that has a kind of a dulling effect, like a little bit of grey paint mixed into PVA or some other kind of way of rubbing wood stain into it or something like that to kind of bring down the tones. When I make these things out of mirrors, what I find most interesting about the imagery sometimes is the fact that it's both quite abstract and kind of a work of realism at the same time. And a better way to heighten that is to make the drawing and the mark making quite obvious in places. Every little element has just enough of some object that you can just about tell that it's real. When it becomes drawn, it changes what it is, and it's sort of the angle that I might be holding the kaleidoscope at or whatever, or what it's looking at, is sort of both incidental and completely not incidental at the same time. And I like the way that by going through the process of drawing it, that sort of makes that sort of dichotomy within the image. I'd always had the impression that when loggers came along and they saw anything of mine, that that would absolutely be it. That was the end of the story. So I couldn't believe it when it was there. They had even cut all the trees in such a way that they had fallen away, which is just, I can't imagine how or what the conversation was between the different guys on the site. I suppose they might have thought that it was some sort of Wicklow County Council commissioned piece, but anyway, so they had left it. So after taking almost 100 photographs, I found that I'd taken one, which is at the exact same angle and the same distance away from it. So that's what makes up that diptych, and really nice to get that sort of before and after shot. That's was one I was pretty happy with. So when I found it, then afterwards, I couldn't believe it. It had been extremely violently broken. You can see the pieces of it here. I mean, the only deductions I can really make are that knowing how it was put together, you would almost certainly need at least two people to do what they did to it. Kind of one as a sort of acting as a lever against the other. I mean, there is the actions of some person kind of directly bearing on the show as well, because the way it was taken apart and the way it was bent and the way it was scraped around are now physical aspects of the work that I can't completely claim authorship over in a way, which is kind of an interesting thing for me because normally I don't give up any creative control at all. So